Good afternoon, everybody. Hey, thank you for coming. My name is John Brooker, and you're here at Sustainable Nutrition. Really quickly, before we begin, I'm going to give a little background in our department, and then I'll turn it over to Erika. So I'm with MUSC Sustainability and Recycling, and we work on various initiatives at MUSC around recycling and waste management, energy and water, food, climate, transportation, and green building. And if you want to hear more about events like this or about anything that we're doing, you can get in the loop on our Green Team newsletter. The sign-up's at the front. And you can also sign up on our website. We're on social media under the at MUSC Go Green tag. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Also, this talk will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel, so you can find it there and share it with people that weren't able to attend today. And we're also in Yammer. So you're here at Sustainable Nutrition, and I'm going to talk briefly about the planet side of this, and then I'm turn it over to Dr. Erika Blank to talk about more of the health and diet portion. So why food is important to sustainability? The number one thing I have up here is that food, the whole food system globally is responsible for 19 to 29% of global greenhouse gas emissions. It's also linked to a lot of ecosystem destruction, such as dead zones, extinction, soil depletion, and pollution. And a lot of those contribute to those greenhouse gas emissions. And also the food system, the way it's currently organized, being very centralized, is not very resilient. So it affects our resiliency and also creates food security issues the way the system's currently structured. The food system also contributes a lot to waste. That's both the packaging of the food and also the food waste. I have the 50% up there because a study has shown that Americans waste 50% of the food that we produce. So that's a huge number. And then also it relates to human health, which we'll be getting into in just a moment. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit more is diet as a tool for change. And a lot of that change would be helping to mitigate climate change. It's one of the most effective individual behaviors you can do. And it's because you have complete control over this. You don't need a policy. You can affect this just by changing what you eat, changing what is the base of your diet. So I think it's one of the most effective things an individual can do to fight climate change. So what constitutes sustainable food? That's food that is sustainably produced. I know that's a definition using the same word, so I'm going to get into it more. So that's local and seasonal food. It's organic and other kind of certifications similar to that. Fair trade food that's produced regeneratively using regenerative practices, and also when you're looking at animal products, responsible animal husbandry practices. Also, sustainable food is less processed. It uses less energy and water to make it, and it involves less waste, so it has less packaging, and also you want to eliminate food waste as much as you can. This is just a picture of like a bulk section, which is a great example of a more sustainable option for getting your food because it eliminates the use of packaging because you can reuse your containers. I think the most important piece, and I think what we'll get into the most here today, is sustainable food is a lot more plant-based. So I think there's less meat in animal products, especially those with the worst impacts, which I'll get into on the next slide. And when you are eating meat or animal products, trying to eat lower on that food chain. And then my favorite quote about this topic was he's actually a student now at MUSC. His name is Justin McGonigal. And we have his talk from previous years about this topic on our YouTube channel. But he says, don't make perfect the enemy of good. And I think that's the biggest message here is you don't have to be vegan now to make a difference. Anything you do, progress in this area is very helpful. So don't be like, well, if I'm not vegan, it doesn't matter. I'll do what I want. So not making it an absolute situation. Does that make sense? I think that's just what turns people off sometimes. They go, I don't want to be vegan, and then they dismiss the entire idea of changing their diet slightly to help with these problems. So this is about the protein situation. It's not all proteins are created equal. And that goes back to kind of an 8th grade biology concept about these trophic levels and looking at the efficiency from different levels of the trophic system, from your primary producers to your primary consumers and your secondary consumers. And so if you look at this, the big blocks right here, that represents the energy. So the primary producers, so like in this case, it's corn, produces this much energy. And you can either use that to feed cows and then eat the cows, or just eat it directly. So if you see this orange block right here, it's actually 10 times larger than the small blue block, which you'd be getting from the cow protein. So the biomass is not efficiently transferred from trophic level to trophic level. You lose 90%. So you can feed a lot more people if you go straight to the corn than eat the cows that ate the corn. So basic biology stuff there, but I think it's important to keep that in your head. And this is a chart talking about the greenhouse gas emissions per kilogram and looking at the different protein sources. So as you can see, you have your animal proteins are way higher. And there's also a range here because it depends on the way it's produced. And there's a lot of nuance there, and there's a lot of different ways to measure this. So this does change if you look from year to year, from study to study, but it's usually about the way they measure, and it doesn't actually change that much. It always shows that the animal-based proteins have a much higher associated greenhouse gas emission. So you have your beef and going down to lamb, you have shrimp. It's always farmed when they measure this when it comes to seafood. I think it's really hard to measure the greenhouse gas emissions of wild-caught seafood, but the farmed is definitely higher based on the practices they use there. You have cheese, farmed fish, pork, chicken, eggs, peanuts, and the rest of the plant proteins. So I think that's an important thing to think of, and just trying to keep your diet on the lower end here. And if you need a little bit more inspiration, here's a cute picture of a cow. And then also, to not be completely biased and be fair and balanced, here's some baby vegetables. So what you can do, to wrap it up, you can adopt a more sustainable diet based on what I just covered. Know where your food comes from. That's really important. Sign up for a CSA share. So raise your hand if you've heard of a CSA. Keep your hand raised if you've had one before. It's definitely worth looking into. They're really nice. So it's basically subscription vegetables straight from a farmer. And it works as a subscription model, and you're actually helping the farmer by covering their risk. They can take less loans because you're giving them the money up front to produce what they're making. So it's a really good way to support the local food system. Also, if you go to Low Country Local's first website, /CSA, they have a great map, which I'll show you in the next slide, about all the different CSAs in the area and other ways to get local food. Other things are farmers markets. We actually have one right here at the MUSC Horseshoe every Friday. So that's definitely worth going to. And then cooking at home is just a great way to control where you're getting what you're eating. And this is an image of Low Country Local First's map about the different local food options you have. So it talks about different purveyors and distributors, but also the farmers markets and the CSAs. So that's definitely worth checking out. And that's it. Thank you, guys. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Blank, and she'll talk about the nutrition angle.
So I'm Dr. Blank. I work at MUSC in Park West. I practice lifestyle medicine, and the plant-based diet is a big part of what I practice. So I'm going to talk to you about the health benefits of a plant-based diet, and I think everything that I'm saying is pretty much in line with what Jonathan said about your food choices. So I like this definition of the plant-based diet, and it's kind of in line with the don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And it was so nice of you to attribute that to Justin, but I think it goes all the way back to Voltaire, in fact. And it was interesting to hear that because I use that a lot too. So I'd say the primary aim of the plant-based diet is to maximize consumption of nutrient-dense plant foods while minimizing consumption of processed foods, added sugars, oils, and animal-based foods. So you don't need to be 100% anything, just aim to eat more of these good foods that nourish your body and promote health, and less of the foods that may have a negative effect on your health and increase to your risk for chronic diseases. I'm still confused which one to press to go forward. Okay.
Or the controller over there.
Okay. So I'm just going to review the science about the plant-based diet as it relates to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, cancer, and the microbiome, and then review some of the good things about the plants, and address that question, where do you get your protein? And then just make the distinction between a whole food plant-based diet and a vegan diet as far as your health is concerned. So cardiovascular disease is still the number one killer in the United States. Somebody in the United States has a heart attack every 40 seconds. And this disease is largely preventable and it can be reversible. So atherosclerosis is the hallmark of cardiovascular disease. And it takes place at the level of the endothelium, which is that thin layer of cells that lines all your blood vessels. So our goal is really to protect this endothelial layer. The blood vessel on the left has a nice, healthy, I think you could see it, a thin layer of cells there. And what the endothelium does is it makes a product called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide helps the blood vessels dilate. When you need more blood flow to an area, if you're exercising, your heart needs more blood flow, your muscles need more blood flow. It also overall improves blood flow and lowers blood pressure. And the endothelium also prevents plaques and cells from sticking to it when it's intact. So the first step in atherosclerosis is damage to this endothelial cell layer. And this is damaged by all of the classic cardiovascular risk factors, by having high blood pressure. The sugar from diabetes damages it, cholesterol damages it. Obviously, smoking also causes damage to the endothelial cell layer. And once that layer is damaged, LDL cholesterol particles move underneath it where they become oxidized. And these oxidized LDLs set off this inflammatory cascade that recruits white blood cells called macrophages, fibroblasts, smooth muscle cells, and they all work together to create these plaques. And after repeated injury and plaque formation, the blood vessels narrow, and eventually an unstable piece breaks off and causes a complete occlusion of that artery. And depending on where it is, if it's in the heart, it would cause a heart attack. If it's a blood vessel to the brain, it causes a stroke. Now, the good news is a lot of this can be prevented. So how does a plant-based diet help with this process? So the plant-based diet can decrease your risk for the hypertension, the diabetes, the high cholesterol that all damages the endothelium. The phytonutrients found in plant foods, you may have heard of polyphenols, red wine, green tea, olive oil, and all of the fruits and vegetables have polyphenols. So they have powerful antioxidants and anti-inflammatories in them that counteract that oxidation and inflammation that causes the plaque to form. And then also the diet can increase nitric oxide through consumption of nitrate-rich foods. Arugula, the leafy greens, particularly arugula, has the highest level of nitrates. Beets, green herbs like cilantro, rhubarb, spirulina, and dark chocolate. And from the Nurses' Health Study, they saw that for each additional serving of leafy greens you have per day, the risk of coronary artery disease went down by 11%. So we see cardiovascular disease can be prevented by protecting the endothelium. Can it be reversed once you have it? So these are two images from what you see when you do a cardiac catheterization. The big artery going down the middle is the left anterior descending artery. That's what they call the widowmaker, if you've heard that. And this is the same patient 5 years apart, before and then after being on a plant-based diet for 5 years. And in the first one where the error is, I think you can see that it's narrowed by plaques. And in the second one, it's wide open. So this is one of the patients Dr. Esselstyn worked with. Has anyone here seen Forks Over Knives? Okay, so you all know who Dr. Esselstyn is. So he was a surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic when he became interested in cardiovascular disease, and he wanted to do a study. So he was given a bunch of patients with severe cardiovascular disease. They had no other options for treatment at that time, and he worked with them on a plant-based diet for the next, 20, 30 years, in fact. With his diet, he aimed for the total fat calories to be less than 10%. His cholesterol goal was 150, and that was with diet and medication. And he got this number from looking at other cultures where there was no cardiovascular disease. Their cholesterol levels were typically about 150. And so he has some data of 11 of his patients after 5 years, and this is one of them. And what they saw was there was halting of disease in 100% of the patient and reversal in 73% of the patients. Around the same time, Dr. Dean Ornish published the Lifestyle Heart Trial. That was a randomized controlled trial. He had 48 patients, and they were randomized to either a lifestyle intervention that was a low-fat, plant-based diet, combined with exercise and stress management and not smoking, compared to usual care. And he compared catheterization data at the beginning and a year later. And what they saw was that 82% of the patients in the treatment group showed regression. And this study, there were no statins. This was just all diet. And he saw regression of the coronary artery disease. In the control group, 53% of the patients showed progression of disease. And in the treatment group, 91% of the patients showed reduction of the frequency of the angina. So their symptoms got better. And what's most amazing to me is the LDL cholesterol decreased by 37.4%, which is a number you would see with Lipitor of 40 milligrams or 80 milligrams. And that was just with the lifestyle intervention. So we know that cardiovascular disease can largely be prevented and reversed. Why don't more doctors recommend this to their patients? So this is Dr. Kim Williams. He's a cardiologist from Rush University. He was a former president of the American College of Cardiologists. And he says there are two kinds of cardiologists, vegans and those who haven't read the data. And that is amusing. And I have some more to add to it from my personal experience. I also feel like doctors don't have enough time in our visits to talk about lifestyle behavior changes. The visits are typically 15 minutes, so it's much quicker to prescribe Lipitor than to talk to people about their behaviors. Also, doctors don't have the nutrition education to feel skilled that they can do that. And the third, which I may think is most important, is that I think that the doctors have dissonance between their own behaviors and what the evidence may show. So until they resolve that, I think they're going to have a hard time recommending a diet to patients that they're not doing themselves. So that's my theory. So diabetes, the incidence of diabetes is increasing in the United States and worldwide. 4,000 people a day are diagnosed with diabetes. Of children born after the year 2000, it's predicted that 1 in 3 will develop diabetes, and for Hispanics, that's 1 in 2. So this is another disease. I'm talking about type 2 right now. This is another disease that can be prevented and reversed. There are multiple studies, observational studies, randomized controlled trials, meta-analyses that all show a lower rate of diabetes in people who are vegetarian and vegan. So just to go over how insulin works, what causes insulin resistance and how the plant-based diet can help that, because insulin resistance is really what causes diabetes. So we're going to pretend these are 2 muscle cells. So what normally happens when you eat, your glucose in the blood goes up. That stimulates the insulin to go up. In order for the glucose to get into your cell, the insulin has to bind to the insulin receptor, and then that opens this glucose transport channel so the glucose can get into your cells. Now, type 1 diabetes, there is no insulin, so the glucose can't get in the cells. With type 2 diabetes, there's insulin resistance, which means that the insulin is not working well and your body has to make more and more insulin. So there's a few different mechanisms that cause insulin resistance. I'm just going to go over one of them right now that's called lipotoxicity. So that lipo refers to fat, so poisoning from the fat in the cells, how that creates insulin resistance. So what happens when you eat a fatty meal, processed food or animal-based food, is that you get free fatty acids in your bloodstream, and these can get taken up by the cells. Also, if all of your fat storage cells are full, if your adipocytes, the fat cells that store fat, have reached their capacity, then your body starts storing fat in other cells that weren't designed to store fat. And that could be in the liver. You may have heard of fatty liver disease, which is the #1 liver disease that we have in the United States now. The fat will also go into heart cells and muscles in this case. So the problem is that we have free fatty acids in our muscle cells where they don't belong. And what that does is it kind of gums up that insulin receptor. We call that a lock, the insulin being the key. So it gums up that lock so the insulin can't bind efficiently. The pancreas starts making more insulin to overcome this. So now you have slightly high insulin levels, which actually causes a whole bunch of metabolic effects I don't have time to get into right now. But that can even be diagnosed. If we draw your fasting labs in the morning, I can see if your insulin level is high if you're starting along this process. So the problem is that what happens is eventually the pancreas can't keep up with the higher insulin levels. The insulin's not binding efficiently. You're not getting all the glucose in the cell, and then the glucose level starts to rise. And then you have prediabetes and diabetes. So the good news is that there is something we can do about it. A plant-based diet is lower in fat. It may have some unsaturated fat, but that's not bad. So by switching to a plant-based diet, it allows those fatty acids to get out of the cells. It allows the insulin receptors to work more efficiently and bind with insulin, and the glucose can get in the cell, and you can reverse that whole process. So I think this next slide shows a small study that nicely illustrates this point. So this was a 24-week study with 74 patients. They were randomized to a low-fat vegan diet versus a typical diabetic diet, like what would be recommended by the American Diabetes Association, although this was in Europe, so their version of that. So all the diets were the same amount of calories. They were all decreased in calories from the baseline to help people lose weight, and all the food was provided. And what they saw was in the experimental group of the low-fat vegan diet, 43% of patients were able to decrease their diabetes medicines compared to only 5% of the typical diabetic diet patients. The body weight decreased more by 6.2 kilograms versus 3.2 kilograms, and that's about 13 pounds to 7 pounds. And that's with being fed diets that have the same amount of calories, just made up of different foods. Insulin sensitivity increased in that vegan diet group more than the other one. There was a greater reduction in visceral and subcutaneous fats, and there were improved plasma concentrations of the oxidative stress markers. So I think those are incredible results. The next topic I'm going to talk about is obesity. Obesity is also increasing in the United States. The current obesity rate is 40%. It's actually only 39.8%, but I thought I could round up to 40 there. About 72% of Americans are either obese or overweight right now. And there are multiple studies, observational and meta-analyses that do show that a plant-based diet can help with body weight. So this is a study that took place in New Zealand. This area, Gisborne, is apparently a low socioeconomic area. Patients were randomized into two groups. One had usual care, and the other one went through 12 weeks of twice weekly meetings where they had educational sessions on the plant-based diet. They watched Forks Over Knives. They had cooking classes. And this diet was pretty strict as far as the plant-based option. They could eat vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains. They were told to limit refined oils, which would include olive oil, and to limit all animal products. And they were discouraged from eating a lot of nuts and avocados. They could eat as much as they want. There was no calorie counting. They could eat till they were full. And they were not recommended any change in exercise. So at 6 months, the BMI went down 4.4 versus 0.4, and this was maintained at 12 months pretty much. And the weight loss at 6 months was 26.62 pounds, and at 12 months that was maintained, and it was 25.3 pounds. So that's pretty incredible where their food is not restricted. They can eat as much as they want. They just have to eat these certain healthy foods, and they were able to maintain their weight to the end of that year. And this one might be going on for 3 years right now. I'm just going to touch on some foods to eat to decrease the risk of cancer. There was a big study in Europe called EPIC. It was a European prospective investigation into cancer and nutrition, I think. And that looked at over 500,000 people in 10 countries. And when they looked at the fiber specifically and compared the people who had the lowest amount of fiber intake to the highest amount of fiber intake, there was a 40% lower rate of colon cancer in the high fiber eating people. With fruits and vegetables, there was a decrease in certain cancers. Fruits, they saw a decreased risk for mouth, larynx, pharynx, and esophageal cancer. There was also lower lung cancer in smokers specifically. And fruit, vegetable, and fiber intake, there was a lower risk of colon cancer, and fiber intake had a lower risk of liver cancer. And this is likely due to the antioxidants and that are in all the plant foods that can help protect your cells from oxidizing free radicals that cause DNA damage and cell damage. Soy also is important for preventing cancer. There are multiple studies that show that soy prevents breast cancer and prostate cancer. And among women with breast cancer, soy food consumption significantly was associated with a decreased risk of death and recurrence, and that was seen in multiple studies. With soy, I would recommend an organic product, not processed, so something like soy milk or tempeh or edamame. So I found that interesting because I think a lot of people think that soy increases the risk for cancer. And then foods not to eat as far as cancer is concerned. In 2015, the World Health Organization and the American Institute for Cancer Research classified processed red meats as a class 1 carcinogen, which means that it's strongly associated with cancer. So the specific numbers on that are that for every 50 grams of processed meat, which is like one hot dog a day, the risk for colon cancer goes up by 18%. The red meat like beef, pork, and lamb was classified as a probable carcinogen. So probably increases the risk of cancer, colorectal cancer. So it's recommended to limit those. And then when it comes to dairy, there are hormones in all dairy, even organic dairy. The cows have hormones themselves. They are often lactating or have just been, they're pregnant or have just been pregnant. And there's specifically, we've seen an increased risk with endometrial cancer and prostate cancer with milk consumption. So my last slide on the science is about the microbiome. Has anyone heard of the microbiome?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think you heard of it 5 years ago? I don't think I had. So the microbiome refers to all the organisms living on or in our body, organisms in our mouth, our gut, the vagina, the skin. And now when we're talking about the microbiome, we're mostly talking about the gut and all the bacteria in the gut. And research is just increasing exponentially. So I think we'll be finding more and more out about this. And I think somebody could talk for an hour just about this. So we have about 39 trillion bacteria that live mostly in the large intestine. We only have 37 trillion human cells. So actually, numbers-wise, we're outnumbered by these bacteria. As far as numbers, that we're more bacteria than human cells. So they have an important symbiotic relationship with us. They're responsible for proper functioning of the immune system, the nervous system, and the metabolism. They help digest and absorb nutrients. They synthesize vitamins and amino acids. They prevent pathogenic colonization from bacteria that cause infections, so they're protective in that way. They regulate GI hormones, which actually regulate weight, and microbiome can be responsible for obesity if it's not right. They regulate immune function. 70% of the immune system resides in the gut, and they regulate mood and behavior with 80 to 90% of the serotonin being made in the gut. In addition, when these bacteria eat fiber, they produce short-chain fatty acids, such as butyrate, and this is the main source of energy for the cells lining the colon. So they maintain a healthy gut lining, which is really important. So you want a healthy microbiome. You want it to be robust in number and diverse in species, and you want the good species that help prevent chronic diseases. And the thing is, these good bacteria really like fiber. So what you eat feeds you and your bacteria, and your good bacteria love eating fiber. If you're eating more of a standard American diet that's high in fat and animal products, you tend to get more of the bacteria that actually can promote chronic diseases. And this imbalance in the bacteria is called dysbiosis, and it leads to many chronic diseases, including autoimmune and inflammatory diseases. And I only had space to list a few here. The celiac disease, diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, obesity, but there are many more. So it's really important to have a healthy microbiome. You can do that by eating fiber from plants. So that is it for our science. So one last thought is I would just want you to take a moment to think about what else you're getting if you're eating meat as your source for amino acids, what else you're getting in that package with your amino acids. So in our meat protein package, we also get saturated fat, which increases the risk for cardiovascular disease and diabetes. There's heme iron, which is the iron that's found in blood and muscles. And heme iron is more likely to promote oxidative damage and inflammation than iron from plant sources. So that also increases the risk of cardiovascular disease and diabetes. There's TMAO. So TMAO is something that your body makes when you eat choline and carnitine that's found in meat. The microbes in the gut actually make the TMA, and then it's oxidized in the liver to TMAO. And this is inflammatory and is responsible for cardiovascular disease. The good news is if you eat a mostly plant-based diet, you have different microbes in your colon, and they don't do that. So you wouldn't form the TMAO. If you were to eat meat a few days in a row, the microbiome changes pretty quickly, so then you would be forming the TMAO again. And there's also nitrates and nitrites in that meat that gets converted to N-nitroso compounds, and they increase the risk for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancer. And the interesting thing about that is that vitamin C and polyphenols can actually inhibit the N-nitroso compound formation. So if you are to eat meat, if you eat some broccoli with it, that would be a healthier way to eat your meat. That would reverse some of that damage. So now I'm just going to talk about the plants for a little bit. So I truly believe in this quote from Hippocrates, "Let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food." I feel that the food should be things that are good for us, that promote health. So what do plants have that are good for us? So they have phytonutrients. So these are chemicals that are produced by plants to protect them from the environment, that in turn protect us. And they're the chemicals that give plant their pigment. There are over 25,000 types. They cannot be extracted into a pill. And they provide antioxidant and anti-inflammatory benefits. So it's a good idea to add color to your plate. I'm sure that you've heard Eat the Rainbow. I feel that green, yellow, and red, they're pretty easy to get. So I try to make it a point to get purple and blue, some blueberries or beets or cabbage. So all plants have these phytonutrients that are good for us. And all plants have fiber. There's no fiber in meat. And fiber has amazing health benefits. So fiber will add bulk to your diet and increase satiety, so you feel full and eat less, and promotes weight loss. Also, people who eat a diet high in fiber tend to have lower blood pressure, lower cholesterol, less risk of diabetes, less plaques and coronary artery disease, less colon cancer, and that healthy microbiome. So that's pretty amazing to me. But still, 97% of Americans are fiber deficient, so we are not getting enough fiber. So plant foods tend to have a lower calorie density. Each of these stomachs is holding 500 calories right now, and as you can see, the one that has fruit, vegetables, potatoes, rice, and beans are more full. So it's more filling, it leads to more satiety and more leanness. So meat and cheese have higher calorie density, and the oil Oil is the most calorie-dense food. It has 120 calories per tablespoon. So I think it's okay to use some oil, as you like, but I would be careful and not intentionally use extra oil because it is the most calorie-dense food at 4,000 calories per pound. So plants also have healthy fats. They have more unsaturated fats. For example, the walnuts, flax seeds are high in omega-3s. Plants have tons of vitamins and minerals. And the only thing that you need to supplement is the B12. Because the B12 comes from microbes, and we're very clean with our food these days and don't have any bacteria on it. And vitamin D we all need to supplement because that's a vitamin that our skin makes when our body's exposed to the sun. So where do you get your protein is a question I'm commonly asked. So plant protein is adequate to meet our human needs. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. The body requires 20 amino acids, only 9 are essential that we need to get from the diet. And all essential amino acids can be found in the plant kingdom in varying concentrations. And from the 9 essential amino acids, the other ones can be made. So how much protein do we need? So this is for the average individual, not an athlete who's training intensely. But you could take your weight in kilograms times 0.8 or your weight in pounds and divide it by 2.2, multiply that by 0.8. That typically comes out to 10 to 15% of the total energy intake. An average woman, it would be 46 grams, and a man, it'd be about 56 grams. And this is a nice picture of how much protein is in all these different plant foods and the vegetables, whole grains, beans, and the nuts and seeds. And if you're eating a plant-based diet, you're probably eating these foods throughout the day. I mentioned here some combinations that would definitely give you a good amount of protein, but you don't even need to think about it. If you're just eating your oats for breakfast, your lentils for lunch, salad with nuts on it for dinner, you're going to end up getting enough protein. Some of the plant foods have all the essential amino acids. It's quinoa, soy, and buckwheat. And this slide shows you the percent of calories that are protein in different plant foods. So, we know about 10 to 15% of our calories should be protein. If you just ate these foods in any combination, you would make up 10 to 15% of your diet from protein. You could just eat walnuts or oatmeal all day and get enough protein, in fact. Has anyone seen The Game Changers? So this is Patrick I know you've seen it. This is Patrick Baboumian. He was in that movie. He follows a plant-based diet. He was named Germany's strongest man in 2011 and broke the world record for most weight ever carried by a human in 2013. In the movie, he broke another record where he carried something like a yoke and walked the furthest, carrying this heavy amount. So what he says is the world's strongest animals are plant eaters: gorillas, buffaloes, elephants, and me. And at one point in the movie, he said, people ask him, how can you be strong like an ox if you don't eat meat? And his response is, have you ever seen what an ox eats? And that really gives you something to think about. And that's like Jonathan's slide that showed the person that was eating the corn versus the person that was eating the animal that was eating the corn. We can eat the plants ourselves. We don't need a middle animal to transport the amino acids to us. And just a quick distinction from whole food plant-based, which is what I recommend. That way of eating emphasizes whole foods. It can be plant predominant or plant exclusive. I call it mostly plant-based because sometimes I might eat something that's not plant-based. But for the most part, the bulk of my diet are these plant foods. And compared to vegan, who would abstain from any food product coming from an animal or containing an animal product. And the risk is that there's some processed vegan foods that are not going to be health foods. And I don't want people to be confused and think that vegan necessarily means healthy. Processed foods have added sugar, added oils, salt, and then these other ingredients that can be put in without being tested, which are generally recommended as safe. Eventually trans fat was taken out of food after it was realized that it was a big risk for cardiovascular disease. So that's something to be careful about. It does worry me now that plant-based is becoming very popular, that I see more foods with a label that says plant-based, and I don't want people to think Dr. Blank told me to eat plant-based. This box says plant-based. So I think it'll be interesting what happens in the future with that. So read the label. Here's an example. This is a processed vegan cheese. It has all these ingredients. Some of them, I don't understand what the words mean. Whereas on the other hand, you can make your own cheese sauce from some whole foods using potatoes, carrots, cashews in this one. And that is obviously a much healthier option for your body than the processed food. And one last thought about this, when I explain the diet to people, sometimes they say, well, that's so limiting. And you can eat all these foods. This isn't even all the foods that you can eat. So I really think it's a diet of abundance. There's a lot of different vegetables, fruits, beans. So I think you can have fun with it and figure out new things to cook. So I wouldn't say that it's limiting. And that's it. This is some lifestyle humor. It looks a little blurry, but I think you can get the gist of it. So that's it. So questions? Thank you.